This is Keith McBee in Washington again. Our camera is still outside the West Wing of the White House waiting for President Johnson to emerge and comment on the tragic death this evening of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. One possible reason for the delay may be that the President may be conferring with advisors on his planned trip to Hawaii tonight and meetings with the American leaders from South Vietnam. We would tend to think, because of the war situation, because of this apparent breakthrough toward peace negotiations, that the President would go ahead and fly to Honolulu and possibly be back in time for Dr. Kim's funeral, and possibly have Vice President Humphrey represent him at the funeral if he is not back in time. As you can see, there are the cameras and the microphones waiting at the floodlit West Wing of the White House for the President to come out. Martin Luther King was 39 years old, shot to death tonight in Memphis, Tennessee, the scene of his latest civil rights demonstration, in some cases violent demonstrations in recent days. As you know, Dr. King in 1964 won the Nobel Peace Prize. He had many critics as well as many admirers and friends. President Harry Truman, after leaving office, called him a troublemaker. Others, especially his followers, thought of him as a saint. He was one of the leaders of the massive march on Washington, D.C., the March for Jobs and Freedom. He was to have staged marches here. Now here's the President.
Saddened by the brutal slaying tonight of Dr. Martin Luther King. I ask every citizen to reject the blind violence that has struck Dr. King, who lived by nonviolence. I pray that his family can find comfort in the memory of all he tried to do for the land he loved so well. I have just conveyed the sympathy of Ms. Johnson, myself, to his widow, Mrs. King. I know that every American of goodwill joins me in mourning the death of this outstanding leader and in praying for peace and understanding throughout this land. We can achieve nothing by lawlessness and divisiveness among the American people. It's only by joining together and only by working together can we continue to move toward equality and fulfillment for all of our people. I hope that all Americans tonight will search their hearts as they ponder this most tragic incident. I have canceled my plans for the evening. I am postponing my trip to Hawaii until tomorrow. Thank you.
President Johnson, on the death of Martin Luther King, he said that every citizen in this land should reject the violence that struck down Dr. King, a man who lived by nonviolence. The President sought to comfort his family, and the President said Dr. King loved this land so well. He said every American of goodwill should join him in mourning the passing of Martin Luther King. The President went on to add, we can achieve nothing by lawlessness and divisiveness. The President postponing his flight out to Hawaii tonight until tomorrow because of the death of Martin Luther King. Vice President Hubert Humphrey is speaking at a Democratic dinner here in Washington tonight. I believe that we're ready to join him there. Apparently we're not going directly.
He is dead. I can tell the audience that in the community where it happened, there is no turbulence, there's no violence, there's just great sorrow. I think it can be said that he now stands with our other American martyrs in the cause of freedom and justice. His death is a terrible tragedy and sorrow, first of all to his family, to our nation, and to our conscience. The criminal act that took his life brings shame to our country. An apostle of nonviolence has been the victim of violence. the cause for which he marched and worked, I'm sure, will find a new strength. The blight of discrimination, poverty, and neglect must be erased from America. And indeed, an America of full freedom and full and equal opportunity is the most fitting and appropriate living memorial, and it shall be his memorial. Ladies and gentlemen, I've consulted with Senator Muskie, your chairman, and we think it would be appropriate if at this time we would call upon the chaplain of the House of Representatives to just say a word of prayer. Would the chaplain step? Would you rise, please?
Eternal God, our Father, who art the refuge and strength of thy people in every age, and our refuge and our strength in this present hour, we pause in thy presence, stunned and bewildered at the shocking tragedy which occurred in our land this night. We offer our prayer to thee on his behalf, praying, our Father, that the cause for which he gave his life may continue. Lay thy hand in comfort upon his family. Give them to feel and to know that thou art with them, and may they find their strength in thee. Again we bow as we have this come to our minds so suddenly. We wonder at times how it could happen in this free land of ours, and yet the apostle of nonviolence has been violently slain. Grant, our Father, that the cause for which he gave his life, of civil rights, may prosper, may continue, until in this land of ours we may have liberty and justice for all. Comfort our hearts as we share with them in some little way the sorrow which has come to this family. Accept our gratitude for his presence in our midst, and give us the strength and the courage and the faith to continue until freedom shall be the lot of all our people. In the name of him who died that men might live, we pray. Amen.
Vice President Humphrey's remarks on the death of Martin Luther King were taped a few moments ago at a Democratic fundraising dinner here in Washington. The Vice President, such an advocate of civil rights, of the Civil Rights Bill, was obviously grief-stricken. He said that in Memphis, the scene of the crime, there is no violence tonight, but there is great sorrow. The Vice President cited the terrible tragedy of this country, a sorrow, he said, not only to Dr. King's family, to the nation, but also to our conscience. He said it's a criminal act that brings shame to this country. Further details on the death of Martin Luther King, Bob Young in New York.
Thank you, Keith. This is Bob Young in New York. A few further notes. Keith, I think, may have touched on the point that Tennessee Governor Buford Ellington has ordered 4,000 National Guard troops into Memphis following this tragic death of Dr. Martin Luther King. A curfew has been clamped on Memphis. There have been some unconfirmed reports of violence, sporadic violence, in the Negro section of Memphis. There are unconfirmed reports of sniping, as a matter of fact, in Memphis streets. Police officers have been told to shoot it out if they're under a street light. And the entire area where Dr. King was shot has been cordoned off, of course. The mayor there, Henry Loeb, has reinstated a dusk-to-dawn curfew for fear that this slaying would incite further violence. Mayor Ivor Allen of Atlanta has rushed to the King home. Mrs. King lives in Atlanta and drove Mrs. King to the airport. She was waiting for a flight to Memphis when she received the word that her husband had been killed. Just last night, Dr. King and his associates had told his associates, rather, that he was not concerned over reports of possible harm while he was in Memphis. And he recalled, he said that he had reached the pinnacle of fulfillment with his nonviolent movement, and these reports simply did not bother him. President Johnson, whom we expect to have word from, a message from shortly, has postponed his trip to Hawaii until Friday because of the assassination of Dr. King. We have a film clip that we'd like to show now. Dr. King returned to Memphis yesterday, just last Thursday. He was at the head of a sanitation workers' march that you may recall that erupted into violence, resulting in the death of one young man and injury to 62 in Memphis. And as he arrived yesterday, Dr. King made this prophetic statement.
I left Atlanta this morning, and as we got started on the plane, there were 6 of us. The pilot said over the public address system, "We are sorry for the delay, but we have Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane, and to be sure that all of the bags were checked, and to be sure that nothing would be wrong on the plane, we had to check out everything carefully, and we've had the plane protected and guarded all night." And then I got into Memphis, and some began to say the threats, or talk about the threats that were out, or what would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. And I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Prophetic words from Dr. Martin Luther King, and he said that less than 24 hours before his assassination. There is a sign of great sadness in New York's Harlem, and perhaps some horror as well, as the news spread through the huge Negro community here of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. Men and women standing in the streets with bowed heads, listening to these reports blaring from storefront radios all along 125th Street. Many persons in the streets are crying, others moving listlessly and appearing stunned by the death of Dr. King. Said one 19-year-old girl he really didn't have to go back down there. Maybe he wanted to prove something. Henry Moon, who is spokesman for the National Association of Colored People, the NAACP, said that he was distressed, dismayed at the news. The most poignant words in a major tragedy often come from the simplest people. Dr. King's driver was on the street outside the balcony when murder struck. The driver said Dr. King strolled onto the balcony and told him to start the car, that Dr. King wanted to go to dinner. The driver tells it this way: "I said, 'It's cold outside, Dr. King. Put your top coat on.' Dr. King said, 'Okay, I will.' He smiled. Those were his last words. 'I heard the gun,' he said." There will be a special program on ABC this evening, 10:30 Eastern Time. Wanted to alert you to that. And we shall, of course, periodically, with updated information on the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. This is Bob Young in New York.